have been entrusted with some or all of the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. But at the same time, for example, this is particularly prevalent in hadith sciences, where even if the scholars would memorize the hadith very early on in early generations, it became the habit that the hadith scholars would teach from the book even if their hadith is memorized. And this was as an additional safeguard to make sure that they were recorded exactly as the Prophet ﷺ is likely to have said it, without addition, without human error. In fact, there are numerous narrations where particular students will say to their teacher, from your book, please, or could you check, because they were so intent on, catching the life of their teacher and not missing even a single hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So these adab and these manners and strategies with knowledge should really motivate us for how in fact we approach our lives in general and our pursuit of beneficial knowledge in general, including our workplaces and our places of study. But of course, inshallah, especially the pursuit of seeking knowledge about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of my teachers actually said that you could count all of knowledge as a muraja'a wal munaqasha, that you could count all of knowledge as review and discussion and debate, right? Because that's when a person really consolidates what they understand and sees other perspectives. And as we mentioned before, this is one of the blessings of studying in a group rather than studying only individually, that a person matures their own knowledge because they see how other people around them approach with different perspectives, and that is a moderating and balancing and expanding influence on their own knowledge, inshallah. So this is just a brief reminder for myself and then for you, inshallah, that these moments of discussion, these moments of review are not just for, to keep things light or to keep from falling asleep. No, actually, they're one of the very essential times that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may bless us to really gather and consolidate our knowledge. The narration comes to mind of the man who asked, بِمَا سَبَقَكُمْ Zuhri. Zuhri was a great early scholar of the hadith sciences. But there were many eminent people that were in the classrooms with him. And Zuhri was like preeminent top mind in that field of that generation. So this is a very interesting question, where one of the other students has said, well, why is Zuhri so much better than you? And it is narrated that in fact, in the answer it was said, I'm summarizing, but that Zuhri, after sitting at the classroom, he would always sit in the front row, eager to be, and that's indicative of so much, right? It's indicative of a thirst of knowledge, indicative of coming early, it's indicative of respect of the knowledge and the matter that is being read. So he was always there. And then as they talked about after the class would end, how he would review, it was said that then he would review, after the teacher would review with his classmates and review with his family, until the narration continues until it says he would go even to the servants and the women at homes and so on. So the whole town, he's like sitting there reviewing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So later in life, he became this incredible mind that narrated a lot of I don't want to say most authentically, but a lot of the very short narration, a lot of the very eminent narrations that come to us are, Zuhri is typically connected to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really, really blessed him with a very special stature in hadith sciences. So inshallah, I pray that this is motivational for you and I, inshallah, in our studies. I want to turn to Al-Quran Al-Kareem in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse number 124. Now I'm going to switch strategies a little bit on, like I said last time. We are not necessarily following the narratives exclusively chronologically, right? So I'll be going back and forth a little bit because we're looking thematically at the spiritual life of this family. But in all of it, inshallah, we're going into the mention of the Quran, into these discussions. And keep in mind that in Quran Al-Kareem itself, this is the approach of the Quran. The story of Ibrahim alayhi salam was not given chronologically from Al-Baqarah, from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas, but rather there were different themes. So I think it's healthy for us. It's going to be a little discomforting because you guys are too wired for academia, right? We're like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter summary, question, discussion, and so on. And then if you're lucky, the answer key and the teacher's workbook, right? But we're not going to have that here, inshallah. So it's going to be a little bit perhaps discomforting, but important, inshallah, that now we're going to come and kind of look back on his life. So in this particular passage, Prophet Ismail is an older young man now. So this is near the end of the life of the Prophet Ibrahim. Remember last time? I'll put it up again today, the family tree, because I know the markers were not clear. Jazakumullah khair. About additional markers today. But here we're looking at Prophet Ibrahim as an older man, and Prophet Ismail as a young man, alhamdulillah, who's past the age of time. So this is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 124. 124.
إبراهيم ربه بكلمات فأتمهن قال إني جاعلك للناس إماما قال ومن ذريتي قال لا ينال عهد الظالمين وإذ جعلنا البيت مثابة إلى إبراهيم وإسحاق هم الخاسرون يا بني اذكروا بكلمات فأتمهن قال إني جاعلك للناس إماما قال ومن ذريتي قال لا ينال عهد الظالمين وإذ جعلنا البيت مثابة للناس وأمنا واتخذوا من مقام إبراهيم مصلى وعهدنا إلى إبراهيم وإسماعيل أن طهرا بيتي للطائفين والعاكفين والركع السجود وإذ قال إبراهيم رب اجعل هذا بلدا آمنا وارزق أهله من الثمرات من آمن منهم بالله واليوم الآخر قال ومن كفر فأمتعه قليلا ثم أضطره إلى عذاب النار وبئس المصير وإذ يرفع إبراهيم القواعد من البيت وإسماعيل ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم ربنا واجعلنا مسلمين لك ومن ذريتنا أمة مسلمة لك وأرنا مناسكنا وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم ربنا وابعث فيهم رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياتك ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة ويزكيهم إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم ومن يرغب عن ملة إبراهيم إلا من سفه نفسه ولقد اصطفيناه في الدنيا وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين إذ قال له ربه أسلم قال أسلمت لرب العالمين ووصى بها إبراهيم بنيه ويعقوب يا بني إن الله اصطفى لكم الدين فلا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أم كنتم شهداء إذ حضر يعقوب الموت إذ قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي قالوا نعبد إلهك وإله آبائك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون.
Allah, a magnificent, incredible text, passage from the Quran, and all of the Quran is amazing. And in particular, it may bring a smile to your face to imagine the state of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as they received this revelation from the Quran. Of course, receiving the Quran is amazing in and of itself. Yet also remember that the Arabs did not know the story. They knew maybe of the existence of Ibrahim, some major figures, but they did not even know the names of most of the prophets that the Quran came with. And imagine the amazement of some of the Jews and the Christians of Arabia as some of these narrations came, spending and challenging. There's many narrations of the Prophet ﷺ obviously interacting with them. But there's a true beauty and a true curiosity that especially those of us that have been born into an Islam have to be reminded of. I think this curiosity is probably most similar to our brothers and sisters that have been blessed to accept an Islam. And these are often, alhamdulillah, an indication of the purest and most beautiful hearts of that generation. But those whose parents were Muslim were born to Islam, this is beautiful as well. And yet there is a danger in this, in that, I've been hearing about the story of Prophet Ibrahim since I was born, or since I was young. And that's beautiful. There is beauty in that. But there is a danger that a person that has a treasure at their doorstep, they might start taking it for granted. And so that curiosity and that thirst that the companions had is something that we should bring to our reflection and our recitation of the Quran. In this passage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the first ayah number 124, we've mentioned this ayah in passing before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indicates that He tested Prophet Ibrahim with some commandments and He perfected them. He excelled in them completely. As a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him leadership over all of mankind. After which Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam immediately asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the well-being of his progeny. Right? And in particular, at the end of the ayah, قَالَ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي, Dhurriya here indicates many generations, whereas awlad or banin in the Arabic language is typically used for more immediate, like children. But Dhurriya indicates a line. And so the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is really thinking about his great grandchildren. Even in this passage, it becomes clear that he's actually thinking of us, though we are separated by thousands of years. So this passage has more than can be put into words. In it is a message for those that are serving in your school, in your youth group, in your masjid, in your MSA, in your own family, that ultimately our thoughts should extend far beyond ourselves. In fact, the most worthwhile work that is done is necessarily beyond and greater than a single person. So if you're in some capacity, and all of us are in a capacity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has selected us to serve, challenge yourself to think about how to make that service, that khayr, a legacy that extends beyond you. The Prophet ﷺ, the best of humanity, he did not die until Abu Bakr radiallahu anh led people in prayer. The Prophet ﷺ did not die until Abu Bakr led people in prayer during the Prophet's life. The Prophet ﷺ was obviously the messenger of Allah. So the fuqaha, the scholars of deen among the Sahaba did not need to rule like in now because the Prophet ﷺ had authority, right? He had direct authority from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But many of the Sahaba, either when they were far away from the Prophet ﷺ, such as untraveled, they issued rulings on the deen, or the Prophet ﷺ granted them permission in that moment and then corrected or affirmed and so on. Why? Because there was a thought about what would continue after the Messenger of Allah. This is just an example. It's an example of Islamic fiqh. There's many more, right? So it's another indication of the legacy thought of the Prophet ﷺ and the training of people. In our terms, you might call this succession planning, right? And Islamic institutions and Islamic work in general suffers from a total lack in general of succession planning, and what happens? It tends to suffer from single points of failure. And so real deep thought here, it's not just a sentiment. It's in fact something that Prophet Ibrahim intends and follows through on and sacrifices for. Let me also comment, and I think a lot of us really suffer from this when we look at people's children. So sometimes, first of all, a person sees a child that might be going through a hard time, and immediately they start blaming who? The parents. This is extraordinarily foolish and short-sighted. How many outstanding children really had the least deserving parents that didn't put much in, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them? And how many parents sacrificed, and yet their children went through hard times? And who said this difficulty or this struggle is going to last forever? And mashallah, when you think back on our own teenage years, mashallah, we just popped out, we're perfect believers, we didn't go through struggles. How quickly we forget our own history, right? And so there is a danger here that when we look, I'm especially choosing children, okay, and because it is the product of such a long investment of time. But similarly, look at somebody leading Salah with a beautiful voice, or somebody that's got an incredible medical practice, or somebody that's got a very lucrative business, or somebody that's very wealthy, or somebody that's very physically strong, or somebody that's in very good health. There is a part of us that is also always very superficial. And we ignore all of the sacrifice and the sleepless nights and the mistakes and the hardship and the this and that and the other that went into that. And this is a tactic of shaitan. One of the big culprits of this is Muslim bios, man. Right? Like, bios are have a purpose. They're not meant to flex muscles and say you're awesome. They're meant to credential a person in front of the people that they're talking to so that you understand where they come from and so that you can contextualize your thoughts. But a truly well-crafted bio focuses not on the destination, but how they got there. Because when we see, mashallah, such and such, we have sister such and such speaking with us today, mashallah, she memorized Quran at the age of 9, and then at the ripe old age of this, she listened to Shaykh this and that and the other, then she completed high school at 14, was early graduate and so on, and now I'm left. Oh great, now I know how this person is totally unlike me in every way, I'm filled with jealousy. Whereas, if the focus is on this person has been a student of these disciplines for these years, started an 8-year, a 4-year intense journey with the Quran and came until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed her to memorize it at the age of 9. Then, every day after school, she would do this and do that and so on until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed her after that. And you see now, I know the means that she's taken to get there. And the means are not inaccessible to me. They may not be what I choose to focus on, but now I know the path to her success. And so in speaking to people, especially junior people, we should focus on this and now come back and just to reflect on that. In so much of the story of Ibrahim, it is not just praise of the destination, it is praise of the characteristics. إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. He was a man of truth, a prophet. So the characteristic is mentioned before the title, although the title is the most honorable of all titles. So what's part of how he became selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because he's a great person. You want to be a great person? Go work on being honest. Be just in your business dealings. Don't pad the timesheet. Be very, very strict with your time. Be disciplined with this. And that is on the path of this. You see, you can follow that and we can struggle against it. So the Prophet, the Quran al-Karim praises the behaviors and the characteristics of people, not just their labels and belongings. That's why Al-Quran al-Karim actually amplifies and magnifies the voice of women. And sadly, many Muslim majority cultures do exactly the opposite, which is really an insult to our deen. There are men that are mentioned in the Quran that are exemplary, and there are men that are awful. There are women that are exemplary, and there are others that are criticized. There are people of young and old that are praised, and others are. Why? Because people are not worthy of praise for what they had no choice in. Why praise someone just for their race or their stature or their genetics or this and that? They had no choice. They didn't do anything. But the Quran al-Karim overwhelmingly praises people for what they acquired, what they sacrificed, what they gave them. So also in this passage, there's a bit of encouragement because ultimately, this work of raising others, of nurturing others is exhausting. Like after you raise your children, you get to breathe for 5 seconds and then immediately there's a concern of grandchildren and so on. And so it's a big hem, right? It can be causing anxiety and so on. In this passage, it'll come inshallah, is that vision where Prophet Ibrahim takes his responsibility but also never lets go of it until the end of his days. Now we're talking about, so I'm going to have to erase this in a moment. So inshallah, I know that inshallah, I'm infected by technology thing, right? Expecting to push a key in actually they do that now, right? Aren't these spoiled school kids having like smart boards and all this stuff, right? There's smart boards now, right? Can they push a button and it just deletes? I'm sorry, I'm old school in that regard. I think a teacher after a hard day's work, like I have these math professors that are like getting the chalk off their hand and then there's this white trail behind them and you gotta bring it into your lungs and feel uncomfortable.
Actually, they push a button, it creates an electronic record, sends it to your email, and then deletes it.
Yeah, that's why I can't be a teacher these days. Is there a tissue box over there for the board? So in the next ayah, I'll put it up in a second. In the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ جَعَلْنَا الْبَيْتَ مَثَابَةً لِلنَّاسِ وَأَمْنًا. Behold, when we made the sacred house a place of constant return and significance for people and security. وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلًّى وَعَهِدْنَا إِلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْمَاعِيلَ أَنْ طَهِّرَ بَيْتِيَ لِلطَّائِفِينَ وَالْعَاكِفِينَ وَالرُّكَّعِ السُّجُودِ. In this, rushing to do good deeds. How many of you have been blessed to go on Umrah or Hajj? Alhamdulillah. Inshallah. May Azza wa Jal accept from you. May Allah bless all of us, inshallah, and especially those that haven't gone with this blessed journey. Allah. In Al-Hajj and Al-Umrah is every physical reason to be miserable, uncomfortable, and annoyed. It's crowded, hot, billions of people. They're not standing in lines. The valley itself, subhanAllah, even some of the scholars indicated this as some of the hikmah of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the Arabs of Mecca. There is really no reason to go to that place, right? Other than the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's barren of vegetation. It's not on the natural intercontinental trade routes. I mean, they had a trade route from Yemen, but unlike, let's say, Palestine or Jerusalem, which is at a very strategic location that for years was desirable in terms of trade routes, or other places that were, such as, the rivers and the agriculture. Mecca had none of that. It's a barren land. So some of the hikmah that they mentioned was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected this place because no one goes there except for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no dunya motivation. And yet, what's the first feeling you feel when you're on that plane out? When you're on that journey out? What do you see all the Hujjaj when they come back? What's the first thing out of their mouth? I want to go back. That doesn't mean that there isn't, sadly, elements of racism. That doesn't mean that there aren't gaps. It doesn't mean there aren't frustrations. But this is really a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As part of the sincerity of this family, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused them to be that call to which generations after generations would come back and come to this place. And Maqam Ibrahim is said to be the place where Prophet Ibrahim would constantly come back and look at the Kaaba to make sure that it was level, correct, right? And so you see that intentness that as they were raising the Kaaba from its foundations, Ibrahim and Ismail, that he would keep coming back, making sure the blocks are level and so on. And that's why it's a little bit further from the Kaaba, further back, because he needs a perch where he can see it. And then they would come and continue to construct and then go back. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored this with the ayah and take from the place of standing of Ibrahim a place of prayer. It continues to be a sunnah that in the rites of tawaf, in the rites of Umrah and Hajj, that it's sunnah for a person to go and pray 2 rak'ahs, preferably at or behind Maqam Ibrahim. Then, and this is very special, if you haven't heard this, note this down and remember it when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you. Inshallah to know. Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned twice in the Quran al-Kareem the commandment for Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail to purify the house. And in it, he said, purify the house for certain classes of people. This ayah comes once in Al-Baqarah in front of you, the second in Surah Al-Hajj, Surah number 20. In Al-Baqarah, and please make a note of this, so you don't know when Allah will grant you the tawfiq to go, and it's even useful, inshallah, for the Masajid. Al-Antahira Baytiya, number 1 for who? The Ta'ifin. What's Ta'ifin mean? People who make a tawaf. Obviously, this is unique to Al-Masjid al-Haram. So purify my house for al-Ta'ifin, those that are making a tawaf. Al-Tawaf is part of the arkan, the obligatory parts of both al-Umrah and al-Hajj. It is unique to al-Masjid al-Haram. It's not done in any other place in the world. It is not exclusive to Umrah and Hajj. So just as a person can offer 2 extra rak'ahs in coming into any masjid, also there is tawaf of tatawwa, like extra tawaf that a person can offer at any time. And the only time the tawaf stops, or pauses, I should say, momentarily, is when? During the obligatory prayers, during the fara'id. And this is from the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His majesty. And subhanAllah, even as we speak now, there are believers making a tawaf. So we come and go, but the vastness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, there's always people. Even if you've noticed, when they clean the mataf, they kind of, mashallah, the brothers that help do that, like create a wedge and go with the tawaf. It's like an operation, right? But a tawaf is continuous. And in fact, also, it is narrated that in al-Bayt al-Ma'mur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's house in the heavens, it's similar to Kaaba in the heavens, that the malaika are constantly making a tawaf. Some narrations 120,000. The angel that makes tawaf does not return until the day of judgment. So the human beings and making this worship are just a part of those glorifying and magnifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A tawaf can only be done in al-Kaaba, and so any time that a person is blessed with a journey to Mecca al-Mukarramah, it should have a good share, inshallah, of their worship. It's very special. It encompasses movement, obviously. It encompasses repetition and returning. It encompasses humility. It encompasses brotherhood and sisterhood. It encompasses dhikr, recitation of the Quran, and dua. Very comprehensive form of worship. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ طَهِرَ بَيْتِيَ لِلطَّائِفِينَ. Number 2, al-aakifin. What does this mean? It means those performing al-i'tikaf. When's the last time we heard about al-i'tikaf? Rest for Ramadan. Okay. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would make al-i'tikaf, seclusion in the masjid for the purposes of worship, especially in the last 10 days of Ramadan. He did it during different periods of Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Al-i'tikaf is coming to the masjid, or for some scholars, under certain conditions, even the home, the seclusion in the worship for the purpose of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So taking a pause from the daily hustle of life and the daily routine exclusively for the worship of Allah wa ta'ala. Perhaps when we draw closer to Ramadan, we'll have a more full explanation of al-fiqh, but being respectful to the differences among the scholars, some scholars allow that a person can make the niyyah for i'tikaf outside of the last 10 days of Ramadan. So a person can make it, for example, in a qiyam program or something like that. When a person is in an i'tikaf, they should seek to, refrain from, constantly, surfing the net or going on the phone or even, excessive eating and drinking and so on. It's a period of special worship for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This seclusion was not a matter of life. The Prophet ﷺ did not spend his life in the cave of Hira, but it's a beautiful indication of that manners in that way, because it's kind of a taste of that, of a taste of how the Prophet ﷺ first received revelation through that seclusion and work and thinking and reflection and pondering. And particularly in our time, I would reflect with you on the following, and this is very important when you come to the story of Prophet Ibrahim. I suspect that in our times, that some people go through their adult lives and may never truly have an opportunity to be alone with their thoughts in a deep sense. I suspect that many of us fall into elements of that spiritual trap. In fact, it is very real that many people in the modern world are very afraid to be alone with themselves and their thoughts in a deep sense. If you pardon me for the example, and this is actually not from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, so I encourage you to avoid it. So many people in the modern world go to the restroom with what? Their phones. And so for those few seconds, even as a person is fulfilling their human need, right? We can't even be alone in thought. I mean, you're not going to be deep in pondering and so on, but imagine that. Most people go to sleep with their phone within arm's reach. The average person is within arm's reach of their phone for more than 22 hours out of the day, right? So that includes a number of sleep hours, obviously. So this i'tikaf, Obviously, I'm telling you, note it down because specifically in Ramadan or specifically in the Masjid al-Haram, a lot of people miss out on this because they just don't recognize that it's a door that's open. So I encourage you, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you tawfiq to go to Masjid al-Haram, make it a goal of yourself. I want to fall in every category that Allah mentioned. Allah said, purify the house for these people. So rush to catch all four as often as you can. It's a really beautiful goal, right? Because especially Umrah takes a few hours in modern times, typically, right? So if it'll take a few hours, then what do you do? Oh, go shopping, right? Like, no, you have a full program, okay? You have some time for shopping, get gifts for people, fine, whatever. But you have a full program. Allah said, purify the house. I want to be in each group. Who knows? Who knows if the tawaf is accepted or i'tikaf is accepted or salah is accepted? So I'm going to be in each one. Why? Because I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept as much as possible. The broader meaning of this spiritual seclusion, this isolation, this depth of connection. Connection doesn't happen if you're distracted. Depth doesn't happen if you're scattered. And that's why really a lot of people complain in modern times from lack of khushu' in their salah. And part of the khushu' in a salah is preparation for a salah. Al-wudu is a preparation. If you're like splashing up water and it's coming down, you're making, mashallah, a sink bath and so on and so forth. And in 5 seconds and go, it's going to be a very different type of salah than if you're making the azkar and taking your time. If you're warming up, if you will, with some of the sunnah, and then you enter a club, you're going to be in a different groove than if you just have to, go for it right away. Now, okay, you're at work, you're between labs at school and so on, at least you have a reason. If you need to make your prayer, and it's listen, then make it on time. But a lot of us have periods of our time where we can do this, but we don't push ourselves to do this. So that i'tikaf has these broader meanings of depth of connection. We mentioned this in the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, qanitan lillah, that he was always deeply spiritually connected with Allah. So it said category 1, tawaf, category 2, i'tikaf. Number 3 is ar-ruk'a as-sujud. Those making ruku' and those making sujud, meaning the people performing as-salah. Okay, so the third category in this ayah are the people performing as-salah. And in Masjid al-Haram, or Masjid al-Nabawi, or Masjid al-Aqsa, you're blessed. From the important challenges that a person challenges themselves is, inshallah, to rush to as-salah, and especially the fara'id, the obligatory prayers. But in general, obviously, it's a deep message here about organizing our lives around as-salah. Okay? And punctuality with Salat al-Fajr, adding a sunnah, rushing to the masjid, all of these, inshallah, are healthy goals and important goals to challenge ourselves with. In the ayah in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الْقَائِفِينَ وَالْقَائِمِينَ وَرُكَعِ السُّجُودِ. So the fourth category is mentioned, the middle one is different. Allah says, al-qa'imeen, meaning those that are standing, which means qiyamul layl, the night prayer. So Allah mentioned these four categories: purify my house, for the people making tawaf, for the people making the i'tikaf, and for those making ruku' and sujood, meaning of salah. In the ayah in Surah Al-Hajj, Allah said the same, and طَهِّرْ بَيْتِي, purify my house, O Abraham, for the people making tawaf, and the people making qiyamul layl, and the people making as-salah. We've mentioned before, alhamdulillah, in our class discussions, a lot of the fada'il and virtues of qiyamul layl and the night prayers. Alhamdulillah, the last third of the night has a special significance, but obviously qiyamul layl, according to the majority of the scholars, is allowable from according to the consensus of scholars, is allowable from Salatul Isha to Salatul Fajr. Especially now, qiyam starts before bedtime. You see what I'm saying? And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, for example, was known to make his qiyam before sleep. Umar radiallahu anh was known to make his qiyam before Fajr. And in each one there is a flavor and a challenge. Okay, but especially in the winter, qiyamul layl is facilitated. It's much easier than the summer. And qiyamul layl does not have to be 3 hours. A person could start with 2 rak'at, the focus on witr, and especially this season before we come, it's only 2 months away, less than 2 months away, right? Daylight savings time, so really special opportunity because it's definitely more difficult in the summer months. Now, as we move to a discussion of the tazkiyah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا. And behold, what Ibrahim said, O Allah, make this land a land of security. This ayah comes in Al-Quran Al-Kareem twice, with a very small, minor difference in expression. In Surah Al-Baqarah, it's in front of you, ayah number 126. It also comes in Surah Ibrahim, the 14th chapter of the Quran Al-Kareem. Here, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا بَلَدًا آمِنًا. Oh Allah, make this a secure land. In Surah Ibrahim, Allah says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا. What's a very minor difference? There is the alif lam, the definite article. So here is baladan, a land. There it's the land. So in this is a very special meaning. The land of Mecca al-Mukarramah, the land of al-Haram al-Mecca, is unlike any other place on earth. It is deserving of special significance, special stature, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed it in ways that other lands have not been distinguished. It is the most beloved place on earth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this, the ulama have mentioned, is closer to the meaning of the ayah in Surah Ibrahim. Make this land, this definite land, a secure land. But here, the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it came in the general, in the indefinite article, like a land, a land. So, and this is a broad lesson, especially in our times, perhaps for Muslims living in these Western lands, or living as minorities. That as Prophet Ibrahim sought to facilitate the worship of Allah for later generations, he started by asking Allah for what? Make this land a land of security and prosperity. That is not unique or specific to Makkah al-Mukarramah. In fact, it is a necessary part of the da'wah and reformation of any person that is seeking to bring khayr in a person, in a context, in a place. Anyone who deals with young children or with youth knows this dichotomy, knows this discomfort. Am I concerned about what people will say or think or perceive, or am I concerned about what's good for this young person? Every, not just Muslims, but including Muslims, struggle with this and have to look at this uncomfortably in the sometimes very superficial ways we approach the context that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed us in. So sometimes somebody is coming, traveling, studying for a few years, maybe they're going back to their homeland, that's fine. But why have the attitude, I'm here for 5 years, I'm going back home anyway? Why not, for these 5 years, I want to enliven and bring life and bring khayr, and I want this place to prosper. Maybe people are lost. Maybe homelessness is an issue. Maybe injustice is an issue. Maybe Islamophobia is an issue. Maybe bigotry is an issue. Nobody said accept that. But can you challenge yourself to truly desire and work towards and sacrifice for security, prosperity, and excellence in the context where you're living? And in this is a very severe criticism of a lot of Muslims across the world. Complacency in Muslim majority lands and disconnection in Muslim minorities. And it is a travesty and an insult that people misappropriate. Imam Suhaib has an excellent lecture on this at the last beloved Sirah conference and elsewhere, but the last Sirah conference in Apex, if you want to see more details on this. But a very detailed and nuanced criticism of, for example, misappropriating fatwa from 500 years ago that say it is necessary to make hijrah from non-Muslim lands and so on. You're going to take a fatwa during the Spanish Inquisition and apply it here? Like, obviously, it's haram for a person to live when the Spanish Inquisition and they're trying to get people out, but it's people being killed, murdered, and tortured, and it's not even just Muslims. But that has a context. Forgive me, you're going to come and apply that to your own laziness because you don't get out of seat and get uncomfortable and sacrifice part of your weekend and make dawah to your neighborhood? Are you crazy? So part of effective dawah, in fact a prerequisite for effective dawah, is a true and sincere love for the person being invited. And much of our reparation, our tarbiyah and so on, other things sneak in. A desire to be recognized, a desire to be correct, a desire to be recognized, to be seen, or whatever else. But true invitation and dawah, as you see here, is what comes before it is love. What comes before it is care. It's compassion. It's a genuine desire, a sincere desire for betterment. So here Prophet Ibrahim said, "Oh Allah, make this a secure land." In Surah Ibrahim, I should give you the ayah number. Surah Ibrahim is Surah number 14. There's verse number, let's turn to it for a moment, inshallah. Verse number 35 to 36. So when Allah said, "Oh Allah, make this land a secure land," Surah Ibrahim, وَجُنُوبِنِي وَبَنِيَّ أَن نَعْبُدَ الْأَصْنَامَ. See, I think this ayah will land on your heart in a different way than perhaps in the earlier. Remember how long we spoke about Prophet Ibrahim working and making dawah, for people to not worship idols. So what did he ask for in this ayah? What's the translation?
And mention Muhammad when he said, "My Lord, make this city Mecca secure and keep me and my sons away from worshiping idols. My Lord, indeed we have led astray many among the people. So whoever follows me, then he is of me, and whoever disobeys me, indeed you are yet forgiving me."
It's incredibly profound set of ayah. But imagine, no, this is at the beginning of his life, the end of his life. This is the end of his life, alayhi salam. Can I put it to you in plain language? If Prophet Ibrahim is at risk of worshipping idols, we're finished. You see what I'm saying? Is there really a fear for Prophet Ibrahim to fall into worship of idols? Well, in this dua is the humility of a prophet. That despite his life's accomplishments, he does not see himself as immune without the worship, without the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very deep lesson in that. Part of that lesson is, when you deal with people, don't deal with them as if you made it. Don't deal with them as if you're better than them. Prophet Ibrahim sincerely asks Allah to protect him and his children from the worship of idols. Look at the demonstration that he's making in front of his children. Look at the demonstration he's making in front of us. Look at the sincerity. And it is the sincerity of his brothers among the prophets. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, after an exemplary and amazing life, he asks at the end of his dua that allow me to catch up or join your righteous servants. Prophet Yusuf is a leader of the righteous servants. But he speaks of himself as joining that group. The Prophet ﷺ says, asks Allah, "O Allah, turner of the hearts, Ya Muqallib al-Qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik." Make my heart firm on your deed. So this humility of the prophets here is incredibly important and an indication that this action starts centered on sincerity. We're going to speak about sincerity extensively, but I want you to notice it because it's going to come to us time and time again. Turning back to Surah Al-Baqarah, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a secure land and to grant its people from the fruits and provisions, but he conditions that statement. That they have to be believers in Allah and the last day. Why did Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam condition that statement? It's a very difficult question. Inshallah, we'll take a moment to discuss it in a group, just a kind of lightning round of 2 minutes. Why do you think Prophet Ibrahim conditioned that statement that these fruits and provisions would be given only to the believers? Go ahead and discuss with the partner, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you. Because many other than this police to come and they affect the people.
That later in the ayah, talking about the non-believers, but it doesn't say that non-believers do not get any cover, do not get any religion, do not get any blessing. It just says that that blessing is temporary, later will have to benefit from this shortly. Later on, shall be admitted to hellfire. I think that the beginning of God, stay safe, they and believers make a dua for them to stay in that state versus the temporary for the night. That's like a part of the like you said, it's a difficult question.
I think there's a similarity, so like you're saying, I'm just trying to focus on why whoever's going to disbelieve is going to be like kind of a shorter time, they're going to grant them enjoyments. Why short period of time? Like it's because of they are continuing a state of disbelief. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them a chance by giving them a glimpse, a short period of enjoyment from this life. Then He will put them in hellfire. It's a way of maybe if they will believe in Allah and the last day, they will also be blessed with this continuous state of safety and the blessing, the bounties that come with it. It's always the vast mercy of Allah. If you look at it, there's if you do bad, you try to like do a bad influence in the safe place, but still there's always the mercy that you can return.
Right.
And enjoy that.
Okay, let's come back together, inshallah. Let's come back together. Why do you think Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam made this dua? What be the intention?
In our group, we discussed the last word in that ayah, which is masir, and the ending of a particular person, and it starts off with those who are in continuous state of belief shall be granted continuous state of prosperity, versus who are those who are in continuous state of disbelief. At the end of the day, even if they get that temporary provision or prosperity, their masir, wabis al-masir, at the end of the day, their ending is not going to be good. But it also highlights like the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to those who don't even believe in Him. But it's that continuous state. It's that sort of like, it's the last word kind of thing. But yeah.
We can extend that.
So this is again a reflection from another scholar. It was not our scholarly opinion, but this was brought up is it appears that in a couple of ayahs earlier, 124, when Ibrahim alayhi salam was asking for including Zuriya for the blessings of Allah, Allah came back and said no, His blessing is going to be not given to him. His promise is not going to extend to the unjust.
Yes.
So this time around, Ibrahim conditioned his dua because he was afraid that if he asked Zuriya, Allah may still limit it to a smaller group. So he conditioned his dua to say only for the believers. And then Allah actually came back and said, well, I'm still going to provide something for the unbelievers in this world. So that was something.
It's a beautiful, beautiful connection and reflection. Anyone else? I can stand up. Oh, sorry. This reflection was connecting it to the earlier ayah, a couple ayahs back, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the covenant would not extend to the wrongdoers among His children or among His offspring. So the Prophet Ibrahim also conditioned this dua to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It would just be that subgroup. It was a very beautiful scholarly reflection. Another indication, of course, is that the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam wanted what for people? Wanted them to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be successful. So as a human being, in his best human reasoning, if we can draw an analogy, why does a parent discipline or punish a child? If you zoom in on that moment, why is that kid in timeout? Why can't they play video games? Why can't they go out with their friends? Why are you being so mean? Right? And so when you look at that moment, that makes sense. Why are you doing this? All the other kids are going to play out, but you have to zoom out, and then you see what? Predating that is a bad decision, or undisciplined, or something. And so that temporary loss is meant to empower them in the long term, to help them in the long term. It's rooted in the betterment of that child, right? Even if we reflect in Ramadan on this note, why are you starving during the day? Why aren't you eating? It's hot, it's thirsty, and so on and so forth. And when you restrict your vision to Fajr, to Maghrib of that day, that can make some sense. Why is this happening? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That this temporary sacrifice is better than living a life a slave to one's desires, to one's emotions, and so on, and so all the other benefits of fasting. So you're giving something up, but you're getting something in return greater as well. So some of the Mufassirin suggested that Prophet Ibrahim, in his human reasoning, may have thought that missing out on dunya so they can wake up and connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is better than being disconnected with Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded with what is better. He said, وَمَنْ كَفَرَ. Even those that reject their pride, they will still be given provision, but then everyone will come to the account on the Day of Judgment. There's a narration, it's not the strongest narration, but it's a narration, that if this dunya had the weight of like a flea's wing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then a conscious rejecter would not drink in it even a glass of water. And Surah Al-Zukhruf, Surah number 43 in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, speaks extensively. If it were not that people would be all one group, that Allah would have showered the rejectors of the kuffar, or the disbelievers, with blessings beyond imagination. And palaces, and gold and silver, and ornaments, and so on. But most people could not handle this. So they would go to that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in mercy withheld this. So it's very deep. But in this is still a genuine rootedness in the goodness for people. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded with what is better. And the passage continues, inshallah, and it encompasses several elements. Sincerity, encompasses tazkiyah, encompasses emotion. But I want to keep, inshallah, bringing this down together. And in order to have that discussion, I want to talk a little bit about the fabric of feeling and the fabric of emotion and how we deal with emotions. Okay? Because for a lot of us, and I think this is a fair criticism of a lot of tazkiyah books or purification of the heart, they can be sometimes criticized for being too theoretical. But we as believers, we need to apply at tazkiyah. Like we said last time, we need to live this spirituality. So part of it is salah and siyam and so on, but a part that many of us struggle with is the dealing with dunya, the sadness, the grief, the hardship, and so on and so forth. So I want to introduce some ideas that I think may be very helpful, inshallah. We'll take our time and consolidate this thought over several classes, inshallah. You will not find this easily anywhere else. To be very frank with you, wallahi, I spent more than $10,000 of my own money over the better part of a decade to pursue this knowledge. That is a great amount of difficulty and very, very spiritual, very specialization. And so I pray, inshallah, it is a benefit, inshallah, and that you can extend it and apply it. But even, you definitely meet people that are individually blessed to be masters or people, inshallah, that you expect are spiritually connected. But sadly, I think a lot of our literature can be criticized. It can be a little bit abstract. So our objective is to really live the spirituality of the Ibrahim alayhi salam. So I'm going to pull this off, inshallah, if you don't mind, and ask you a broad question. So as we go through these tests, we inevitably encounter hardship and difficulty and feelings and thoughts. Part of a crucial part of at-tazkiyah is seeking a balance and a mastery over our thoughts and our feelings. That does not mean controlling the thoughts or the feelings themselves 100%. It means controlling what is done with them and the actions that we take irrespective of them. So we can categorize broadly a few ways to deal with a feeling. I think most of you will not have heard this before. Some of you may have heard it, and for those of you who heard it, we'll extend it a little bit more to the advanced level, inshallah. What's one way to deal with a feeling? Ignore, okay? There's one way to deal with it. What else?
Suppress it.
What else?
Unleash.
Unleash. That's a powerful word. What else?
Embrace.
Embrace. Deflect. What do you mean by deflect?
So if you're one way, you act in complete overall.
Okay.
Okay. Project it onto other people.
I said deny. Yes. Sorry, I couldn't hear. Accept. Sure. So accept and embrace have some similarity, ignore and deny have some similarity. Yes.
Let it take over your life.
Okay. It's certainly a very real reality for all of us and for many people. Yes. Analyze, root, determine. Now I want you to notice someone said confront. Now I want you to notice, just notice for now, that we've not said a positive or negative feeling. That still on our list is to analyze and root it, but I want you to be very attentive to the fact that we haven't said positive or negative yet. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Accept but hide.
Oh, okay.
Blaming God.
Reflecting and blaming. Good. Yes.
Be present with them.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Like just like what you said about not being alone with your thoughts, even for positive emotions, being present with them and recognizing what you did or what happened for you to feel that way, or just acknowledging that you feel happy or that you feel angry.
As instead of saying, give yourself some time out.
I have a question. I know you didn't mention it in the title, but is it like inwardly, how we're dealing with the feeling inwardly, or what actions to take on how to deal with the feeling?
It comes as both. So in other words, some of them are purely inwardly, some are purely outwardly, some can come as both.
Say pray.
Okay, pray. Take two more.
Correct.
What do you mean by correct?
So, for example, you had like seen someone who achieved a certain amount of success, and instead of being happy for them, you feel like jealousy toward them or something.
Okay.
I guess trying to get to that point of maturity where you can like let go of that. So when the future comes and someone else is in a similar position, it's happy for them.
Excellent. So I would take one more, Charles. Okay. Okay, the triggers. I saw two more, so I'll take them.
Communicate.
Communicate. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
So like if you're having a specific, it could be like a good or bad feeling, but typically like a bad feeling, you talk about it with someone that you trust or you love, and
Okay.
you can either correct it or maybe like amplify it if it's a good feeling.
So,
I was gonna say that.
I'm going to say that. Okay, good. So this is excellent. We've got a lot of coverage. I'm going to suggest 5 broad categories that may encompass many of them or all of them, inshallah. So this is a more granular look. It's important to see that level of detail. And it suggests, inshallah, some broad categories. So several of these are, we could broadly term as ways to suppress a feeling. Bottling up, ignoring can be considered a form of suppression. Because just because we're not conscious it's there, or it doesn't mean that it's disappeared. It'll come back. It's a very subtle form, can be considered a very subtle form of suppressing. Generally, most people consider suppression of a feeling to be the most harmful way of dealing with a feeling. That does not mean that it does not have its place at times. So sometimes the time or the context doesn't necessarily lend itself to anything but suppression. But that's using suppression for a temporary purpose with the intention to switch strategies. Okay? So you're in a public gathering and life is happening and somebody just says a poisonous comment. You're going to feel a feeling. It may be difficult in that moment to engage in a discussion. You don't really have the time, or you're in the middle of something, so you can't go to seclusion or whatever. So you might suppress it with the intention to come back and consciously revisit it. It's a little bit different than what many of us fall into of long-term ignoring or suppressing. That is considered to potentially be the most destructive way of dealing with a feeling. What is a positive of the suppression tactic, and a reason that many people come to it?
Not react, talk about it, not react, and then you control or you don't react in the moment.
So, good, what else? Okay, good.
Reflect.
So, a lot of these comments I think we could broadly consider to be that it's low risk, and because it's suppressing, it doesn't bring about a reaction from others in the moment, right? And so it's very safe in terms of the feeling bringing about a reaction from somebody else or a response.
So then you say aside from minimizing like negative repercussions or actions, it allows opportunity or room for positive emotions to take place. Like positive behavior in response to whatever.
So, run it by me again.
So aside from like minimizing negative repercussions, so if someone like got you mad instead of lashing out, then you can take the time to like, I guess, reflect, but also allow entry for other feelings to take place.
Yes, absolutely. And so most people consider, many psychologists consider that each of these 5 broad categories will be used and have a context for use in life. But not being judicious or conscientious about it can cause a person to fall prey to their feeling or feel negative repercussions in themselves and their social life. But I would suggest that none of these 5 do not have benefits or do not have context where they could be a very judicious choice. The issue is having a lot of things in your back pocket, if you will, and conscientiously and consciously choosing a strategy that fits the moment, that fits the feeling, that fits the context. Okay? Many people just accidentally gravitate towards one or another, or their personality may be more given towards one or another, right? But remember, each of these things has a time or place. So I may find it easier to suppress, or I may find it easier to unleash by a personality. But that doesn't mean that that's going to bring about the best outcome in every context.
Always better to suppress and that feeling is not a good one. If it's not a guy's thing.
So I think this thought has a lot of merit. I would suggest that we continue to explore it as a class. Let's look at other things and think about definitely, like what you shared with us, that choosing not to suppress and choosing to, category 2, express all the time whenever I feel some energy inside is going to create a lot of hardship for me, right? And so that's coming back to the fact that we need a lot of tools so we can choose a time and context for dealing with these different things. But let's revisit if there are other things that we can bring to bear beyond suppressing as well. So some people call suppressing bottling it in, right? And again, part of the benefit is that it's not out there with people, at least not immediately. Expressing it, which several, alhamdulillah, you've mentioned more granularly, several subcategories. What's the main benefit of that approach? It's off your chest. What's the main risk of that approach? It's all over somebody else, right? And so expressing the emotion without being very conscientious and specific has the benefit of it coming out, has the risk of that it came out all over somebody else. And so it can prompt a response. Now we mentioned, mashallah, other subcategories of expressing. So somebody explained, communicate with a person of trust, a person of confidentiality. That's a form of expression. It can also be a form of category 4, but it's a more judicious, more intentional expression. More intentional expression. In moments of anger in particular, in moments of passion, moments of being overwhelmed, the expression that is less controlled and all over whoever's in front of you, or all over a group of people, often brings people a lot of heartache, right? And so again, this does not mean that there are not appropriate times and manners to express, but it's about trying to be a little bit more judicious.
Okay, so what's the difference between suppression and al-hilm? And then I have a question about the
Al-hilm as a characteristic, is that a very good question that we talked about last time, can be thought of as broader than suppressing. So certainly there is a suppression in the moment. Let's say a child is extremely disrespectful to a parent, and that parent has a young child, like a elementary school. That parent has a lot of authority. Sorry. That parent has authority, has strength, has power, but in the moment they're not needing to flex that because they see a bar. That's hilm, and that's momentarily a suppression. But as you will see, it is also a lot of other categories that are a little bit higher. It is an objective not just to suppress an angry reaction, but to emotionally lift the person up through a reframing and through an education, which we're still coming to, inshallah.
So is that associated with like authority or leadership, like with Ibrahim? Or can it be like a personal thing?
Al-hilm is a characteristic like sabr and patience and so on that can be found in any people irrespective of authority. But one of the highest forms of hilm is when a person is forgiving in a position where they have higher authority, right? Rather than letting go or not acting in a position of weakness. And every human being faces both in life. Okay, I don't mean to be too technical, but al-hilm as a characteristic will benefit you in everything, but a forgiveness in a position of authority is considered like a higher form or more rare form of forgiveness. And in both there is immense goodness. And so we should not restrict the goodness to one.
It seems to me that Islam gives us tools to both suppress and express certain feelings, like lust, for instance. We lower our gaze to suppress that, but we can express it in the context of marriage. Anger, able to sit down and lie down if you feel angry. So Islam gives us concrete examples of what we're supposed to do and rules to go by to express our feelings adequately.
Absolutely. It's a very profound statement, and I appreciate you sharing it. Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali, the 20th century scholar, makes a similar statement, or expand it, inshallah, we examine it, makes a statement that Islam does not ask us to quash our desires and our feelings, but balances them in the highest plateau between unrestricted expression and blindly following the desires, and on one extreme, and the other extreme being a denial or a quashing or a suppression of those desires and feelings. So in Islam, we asks us to elevate these to the highest plateau. You give a very profound example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not deny our natural drive for companionship and intimacy and so on, but asks that to be controlled within an institution of marriage. So a person has great flexibility and leeway in that, but then has to control it the other day. And the way we talk to each other is different in a family context versus a professional context versus an unrelated context and so on. And in all there is good. This is Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali, the 20th century scholar, not Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, the classical scholar. There's another thought in my mind. Sheikh Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, rahimahullah, he has a very interesting expression. He says, look at the prohibitions of Islam in a broader lens. So when Allah commands you not to steal, don't think about it that Allah has kept your hand from others, but that Allah has commanded the billions of humanity to keep their hands off your property and protected you and made it sacred. Similarly, we mentioned the example of lowering the gaze or of chastity and so on and so forth. Many Muslims approach this as a lack. Like, I can't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, I can't have this, I can't have that. But reframing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted your family, your status, your chastity, yourself, your person, a sanctity and honor that all these billions of human beings, the ones that Allah has not given them the right, then they have no right to look on you in that way. That they have no right to extend their hand to you in that way, to your property in that way. So it is a thinking of the haram as a granting of sanctity, sacredness to you or what is connected to you, rather than just a refrain. One more question and then we'll come to you.
So how does Islam view expression of feelings, especially with sometimes positive feelings and being seen as you enforcing if you talking about it, or if you have a negative feeling, the context of it might be seen as backbiting or criticizing someone else.
I'm going to ask you to hold on to this and to bring me to account next week. So we mentioned lust, we mentioned pride, we mentioned courage. If you guys stick with me a little bit, I'm not going to be able to get to it all today, but I'm going to give you a framework by which to think of some of these in a broader thing, so that when you're doing your tazkiyah, you can get at the root of why a feeling is coming. But first, we have to extend how we think about dealing with feelings. So notice almost all the questions we're getting, these excellent questions, excellent discussion, are leading around suppression and expression. Because for many of us, we're in top 5, we're top 2 or 3 ways to deal with a feeling. Most of us are familiar with bottling it in. A lot of us call this venting. Venting can be positive, like some of you use venting as a trusted confidant, or it can be kind of unleashing on somebody in an uncontrolled way. Okay? Each of these can be used in good and bad. A third way, I saw one here that mentioned, maybe this, I expected one, but maybe there's others that I'm not seeing. But broadly, we can call it, yeah, I saw it now. There's several. Various escapes of the feeling. Like all of these, they have a judicious use and they can have destructive uses. What's a destructive escape from a feeling that people suffer from? Actually, North Carolina is one of the highest in the country. Drugs, chemical addictions, right? Alcohol. For many, many people, this starts first and tragically, socially or emotionally. It doesn't start from just a curiosity, what's it taste like, what's it feel like. Many people start socially, all the cool kids are doing it or friends are doing it, or that environment in the full of it, or emotionally, as an escape, I want to get out of it. So chemical addictions, drugs and so on can be problematic uses of the escape from feelings. It can be used judiciously, such as when a person is feeling a lot of heightened emotions, that they kind of pause and step away even entertainment in a sense, can be a very judicious escape. That I know I'm hot right now, and I'm gonna totally switch gears and do something entertaining, halal and fun, and unplug for 3 hours. That's a judicious escape. We talked last year about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that do not become angry. If you notice in our practical discussion, several of the practical suggestions were some form of even a spiritual escape, right? In other words, a person that's angry, you weren't intending to make salah, and you go and you make wudu and you pray 2 rak'ahs. That's much more than an escape, of course, but the originating intention was escape, was to get away from the feeling. But the manner you chose to get away brings you to a higher level, right? Because it's going to do more than escape. This comes in category 4 and 5. So escapes, I think, are quite underutilized in the management of feelings. Escapes can become problematic when they're utilized to the level of addiction or they're debilitating. A person is on YouTube all day and night or does not have that drive or deep depression. And these are very real. They touch us, they touch our loved ones. But judiciously, escapes can help essentially recenter the mind, right? A simple escape that comes to mind is you want to write the world's hottest email, and you leave it in the drafts inbox for 24 hours. And you come back to it. It's kind of an escape, right? But it's not acting on that feeling in the moment.
Would it be correct to say that escape can also be phrased as channeling your emotions into something else?
It's another way to think about it, certainly. Yeah. That is. Sorry? Sleeping, absolutely. Yeah. That is very effective escape, right? That a person is just, escapes can be very centering. Escapes can be very centering because when the feelings or thoughts have a grip on a person, you're not yourself. You're not thinking straight, you're not acting you're not going to act in the way you would act if you have perspective and time. So escapes give you perspective and give you time. Yes.
But it's not just the action though, right? So if I'm angry and then the action is to pray, but then I'm praying angry, then I've never really escaped. Is that correct?
I'm not following, I'm sorry.
So like if I'm like entertainment thing, I go and watch TV, but I'm still thinking about the feeling, then that's not truly escaping, right?
Jazakumullah khair. It's a very, very, very profound question. I would suggest that the outcome of the escape is not the absence of the feeling. Doesn't mean not the feeling is going to go away. So let's say you go and you're angry and you make wudu and you're praying, and like you said, you're praying angry. Generally, that's still better than acting on the anger in the moment. Why? Because the splash of the cold water on your body does something to your physiology. Then you pray, let's say you pray 2 rak'ahs and you're hot. You're right, you should challenge yourself, try to not be angry, but then you pray, you're like, my God, was that even a prayer? And then you come back. That's very different than in step number 1. When my blood pressure is here, I'm going to act on that anger. You see what I'm saying? Even if after the prayer you acted on the anger and there was harm, probably be much less harm. It's desirable to escape to a point where a person comes back, but it's very, very rare. Unless a person is in severe depression or chronic, like debilitating escapes, almost always the exercise of an escape at the heels of an emotion will reduce or eliminate the harm that would have come in acting on that feeling in the moment. Very rarely is that not the case. Like somebody who their escape is YouTube and they've become all day and night on YouTube and they need to break that cycle, or very severe depression. But for many people in many stations of life, if you're resisting that escape, probably the escape is going to. But I think this is a very, very subtle, very profound question. Give me a second, I gotta get to these. Is that okay with you? Yeah, that's your friend. Just to make sure, inshallah. So, let me introduce. Should I keep you hanging until next time on 4
Tomorrow is not promised.
And see, MashaAllah. There's a student, right? He tied us back to the beginning of the class, back to that student with the hadith teacher. Said, tomorrow's not promised. Give us the hadith now. Now what am I supposed to do? I'm done, right? Number 4 and 5. We're going to kind of, what do the young and hip people call them like that?
Mind blowing.
Yeah, there we go. I like try to be cool but fail miserably. Like mind blowing, right? Inshallah, it'll be mind blowing. Be a little bit overwhelming still, possibly, especially if this is the first time you're seeing it. We encourage you to stay patient because next time we're going to tie these 5 to a structure about thinking about the poles. Right? So I don't want to think about how to manage 5 billion feelings. Sometimes I'm angry, sometimes there's something like that. So just like we put a big category for all these, give you a category to think about the frustrations that we come to Tazkiyah with, which will help you do that. And so you're getting half the story today. So if it's not all putting together, be patient. We're going to practice, inshallah. It takes time. Right? Number 4, which I don't think we mentioned much of, but it could be elements of this. Broadly, are elements of managing the feeling. What do I mean by manage? Managing can be broadly thought of as using the mind to change the feeling. So managing here, what is meant is using the mind to change the feeling. Examples of that are reframing. So let's take a simple example. Person wakes up, it's cloudy and kind of dark, and it looks like there's a chance of rain. And somebody says, this would be a terrible day. Again, starting with a simple thing. That's a feeling. Now you can use your mind and manage that feeling, okay? And reframe how you're looking at the same set of things, okay? That's something as simple as the weather, okay? Now you think about things that truly cause people frustration. You're in a Quran class. MashaAllah, the prodigy student just like computer. Somebody else is struggling a little bit. Right? That person can feel less, can feel not as accomplished and so on. You can reframe that. Say the Prophet ﷺ said that whomever recites the Quran, that struggles a little bit, he has double the reward. So that kid doesn't get double the reward, you do. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's not literally how you say it, just so I don't get in trouble. You get what I'm saying. Reframing. Many people that experience trauma, advanced therapists will use this to manage their feeling because a victim of trauma can reach the point where the aggressors that performed that trauma on them did that horrible thing once, or 10 times, 15 times. But that person has done it to themselves in their mind 100 or 1,000 times. They've done it more than the perpetrator of the mistreatment. So managing that emotion is reframing how you look at the same set of things. Right? We haven't changed the variables. That doesn't mean we can't try to change the variables, but you're not guaranteed to be able to change the variables. So managing it is a use of the mind to reframe, refocus, reperspective the feelings about the same set of things. Again, now if you're able to change it, it becomes there's a lot here, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's stuff about some modalities and how a person sees and so on. So there's a lot you can do here. Some of you that might be aspiring counselors or therapists know that this is a very kind of hot topic right now in terms of various techniques that are very active in therapy and using the mind to reframe how a person looks at something. Right? So these are all broadly managing. We can see a dimension of some of this in the stories that we're talking about. We haven't gotten there, but particularly how Prophet Ibrahim approaches the commandment to sacrifice his son, right? So he comes to him and engages him in the process and ascribes the authority to Allah, not to himself. Ya abati, I'm sorry. Ya bunayya inni ara fil manami anni adbahuk. Engages them in the decision. This can be thought of as a means of guiding the thought process and so on and reacting to this. We'll do a lot more examples of this, a little bit abstract right now, so we're going to sink our teeth to a lot of examples. The fifth one, and can be thought of as the highest and the healthiest, is releasing or letting go. Okay, I'm just going to introduce it as a concept this time. We'll start training on it and teaching on it and giving you some examples next time. But it harkens back to the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. That we know, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that your chest is tightened by that which they say. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acknowledged a physiological response in the Prophet ﷺ to the lies that people were saying. And then he elevates, and we could say the Quran uses elements of higher than 4 and 5, that reframes how the Prophet ﷺ looks at it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يُكَذِّبُونَ. They are not really calling you a liar, but the wrongdoers hold the ayat of Allah in earnest contempt. And so that's a bit of a reframe, an aspect of that. Obviously, I can't limit the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to our categorization, but there could be an aspect of it. But elsewhere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُن مِّنَ السَّاجِدِينَ وَعَبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. So glorify the praises of your Lord and be among those that are prostrating and worship Allah continuously until the certainty of death overcomes you. So that's a bit of this with spiritual truths, that the Prophet ﷺ is ordered to be in a constant state of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, immunizing and protecting himself about the inevitable harm of people that will come. And the inevitable feelings. These feelings, which we'll start with next time, are releasing the whims, the pulls of dunya. It's not releasing, oh, I don't care, I'm a loser, I'm so on and so forth. It's freeing oneself from the pulls of having or not having. This is very deep, very subtle, inshallah. Very key to the practical aspects of tazkiyah. We'll start our discussion with it next time, inshallah. In the next part of the passage, Prophet Ibrahim says, O Allah, send amongst them a prophet from themselves that will recite to them your signs and will teach them knowledge of the wisdom of Scripture, will elevate them and purify them spiritually. So what we're trying to build is a framework and some tools to apply our ibadah for spiritual purification, inshallah. We'll see you next time, inshallah. By the way, in 2 weeks, inshallah, we have an intention for a very special guest lecturer, inshallah. Allah grants us tawfiq. Imam Suhaib Webb will be coming, inshallah, to teach our class. We'll have an opportunity to engage with him and to also, inshallah, engage in question and answers.